Welcome back to Happening Now, and new information revealed as mystery still surrounds a deadly Amtrak derailment in Philadelphia 9 months after it happened. The New York Times reporting that the key to the wreck that killed 8 people could be something investigators call lost situational awareness. The paper citing 2 potential scenarios, one in which the train was hit by a large object, causing the engineer to hit his head and be knocked out briefly. By the time he's back up, it's already too late. Or the engineer got lost, confusing the sharpest curve with the curve before it, only realizing his mistake at the last moment. Joining us now to discuss it is John Hyatt, a railroad investigator for Bremseth Law Firm. Welcome to you. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, Abby. Thanks for having me.
So I remember the aftermath of this horrific crash. There were a lot of folks that wanted to blame the engineer for what happened. And reading this piece and more about the investigation, it seems like not only was it not fair to blame the engineer, but sounds like he wasn't even at fault for this.
Well, that's forming its way into be truth. And I think part of the problem is, and I think what this whole thing really is focused on, is the positive train control. And as the investigators for the NTSB said right off the bat, this whole thing was preventable. And, you know, to express how important that positive train control is, the head of the Federal Railroad Administration said this. She said that every engineer has to execute everything perfectly, every hour, every day. And if they don't, if they vary from that, the smallest lapse can mean disaster. Those are really tough working conditions, and that's what this guy was up against. This PCT discussion has been going on for a long time, and starting back on November 11th in 1993, there was a head-on collision in Kelso, Washington, out here on the West Coast, and Mark Poehler, Tom Klein, Kenny Mercer, Larry Brooks, and Wayne Kronberger perished in that. These 5 guys had over 100 years of railroad experience. So if it can happen, then it can happen to anybody. And at that point, the NTSB said they would use that as a vehicle to try to get positive train control pushed through Congress. And obviously, it keeps dying in Congress. Little by little, we're getting dribs and drabs of it. But again, in Chatsworth in 2008, we lost 25 people. The NTSB said the same thing.
Well, and John, you mentioned PTC, and that is also mentioned in the article. Sarah Feinberg of the Federal Railroad Administration, she said if a train is traveling in an area where PTC isn't in place and working as a backstop, you've got a situation where an engineer has to execute everything perfectly every hour, every day, every week, all the time, because the slightest, smallest lapse can mean disaster. I mean, this sounds like a situation that we shouldn't be in even today. So how are we in the situation? When you look at Europe, you look at China, and we are so far behind when it comes to our railroad system.
Well, you know, our infrastructure system, our railroad system is like our life's blood. And if you start getting some blockages, the next thing you know, you're going to have some bad results, some aneurysms, if you will, like we had in Philadelphia and like we had in Chatsworth and like we had in Kelso, Washington. It's a very dangerous scenario. But you take this engineer, Brandon Bastian, who has been drugged through the keyhole and has come out the other side with his head held high. This guy was one of the best engineers that Amtrak had, more than likely. He was a notch above. They're all great. This guy had checklists for his checklists. And, you know, to put all this on him, stick him on a locomotive, one person, with all these gauges and controls and screens in front of him, whistles to blow, crossings to watch for, people working on the track, and then throw a bunch of fist-sized rocks at him at about 70 miles an hour, and then, for extra measure, turn off his positive train control. And you've set this individual up for failure.
Yeah, you mentioned the rock throwing. You mentioned the rock throwing, and that's in the article as well. A lot of people don't know about this. I didn't realize, because I take this train all the time, that you have basically, you know, thugs or young kids that are close to the train, and as a sport, they called it. They throw these heavy rocks at the train, and this could have been the situation here. Is this a real thing? And if so, what do we do to stop that?
Well, it's a very real thing, and talking to some of the law enforcement in that area, it's very porous. You can get onto the railroad tracks just about anywhere in that area. And obviously the railroad track structure is built on ballast, which is baseball-sized rocks. And if you have one of those coming at you at 70 miles an hour, it's going to scare the heck out of you. It's, you know, and not having the positive train control there is just unexplainable. Yeah. It would be like getting on a plane to fly from Seattle to Hawaii, and your pilot's saying, all right, I'm going to be working by myself today, and I've got a lot of stuff going on. I hope we don't hit a flock of geese, and I'm going to shut off my autopilot, and I'm going to lock myself away. Now everybody have a nice trip. You know, you wouldn't be comfortable with that.
No, I mean, it's a situation no one wants to be in. If anything, this is a real wake-up call that we have some serious work to do. I recommend everyone read this article in the New York Times. But John Hyatt, thanks for laying this out for us. We appreciate you being with us.
You bet, Abby.